It's a good pleasure to follow the noble Lord Judge and welcome his front and centering of the climate emergency and nature crisis, and to thank the noble Lord for his expression of support for Amendment 169 that appears in my name. I also thank the noble Lord Whitty, for his expression of support. Before I get to that, however, I wish to briefly speak in support to the amendments 132, 167 and 168 in the name of the noble Lord Stevenson of Balmacara. It's notable that in the EU there are rules about the funds allocated for the alleviation of poverty and inequality, something that has been entirely lacking in UK practice and procedure, under which the government has been able to direct money for electoral advantage without rules or oversight. The Americans have a word for that, pork barrelling, and the practice is as unattractive as the metaphor. I share the concerns expressed by other noble lords speaking in this group about the devolution issues that other amendments seek to address, but as I've addressed that in other speeches, I speak now chiefly to Amendment 169. It seeks to ensure that those who receive financial assistance provided under the provisions of the internal market can receive it only if first a climate and nature emergency impact statement is undertaken. This would ensure that public money is only granted to development consistent with net climate, nature, environmental goals and targets. This amendment, and my argument for it, builds on the comments of my noble friend Baroness Jones of Bolscombe in the last group, who was reflecting on the damage done by massive and continuing fossil fuel subsidies. And it has much in common, as others have noted, with Amendment 166 in the name of the noble Baroness Lady Boycott, to which my noble friend has already spoken. But 169 extends further, calling for a detailed mechanism for each project, rather than the overview included in 166. I must remind your Lordship's House, as the noble Baroness Lady Boycott did, that the UK is the chair of the COP26 climate talks. We have a responsibility to be the world leader that the government often proclaims it wants to be. Green finance is an issue of great interest to a wide range of international bodies and indeed commercial organisations. I would say to your Lordship's House that all new and continuing financial schemes, whatever the source, have to be green, given the urgency of our climate emergency and nature crisis. I note that on June 25, the Committee on Climate Change made a progress report to Parliament, although we've yet to hear the government's response. The report showed how far our current policies are from meeting our existing commitments and the future larger commitments that we must surely make to live up to the enhanced ambition committed to beyond that of Paris 2015, something we've recently seen China taking a clear global leadership role in. I refer to an answer I received just today from the noble Lord Callanan to a written question on the Green Homes Fund. I was asking if the programme would be extended and the funding enhanced. In his answer, the noble Lord helpfully told me that £65 billion of investment will be needed for housing retrofit across the 2020s. £65 billion in 9 years, my lord, versus £2 billion of current funding. Well, we clearly need to see some of the funding covered by this bill directed towards this area, not nature-destroying, planet-trashing options. And since in education the government is very keen to look at league tables, we might look at two, both published in the past fortnight. One showed per capita contribution to plastic waste production. In this we are, unfortunately, world leading. We're second behind the United States on this plastic choke planet, a huge and terrible responsibility that we have to use both regulatory tools and funding to promote ways of cutting back. Secondly, the European Environment Agency reported that the UK has the third greatest proportion of marine and land areas in bad conservation status. We're close behind Belgium and Denmark. More than 70% of our habitats, quote, exhibit overwhelmingly bad conservation status, close quote. Again, must we not only make sure that we don't fund further damage, as a matter of extreme urgency, we need to direct funding in ways that starts to repair the centuries of damage that's been turbocharged by our economic structure in recent decades. These are not abstract environmental nice-to-have issues, but about human survival. I ask your Lordship's House tonight to think about the people of Nicaragua and Honduras, seeking shelter and safety as, to quote an NBC headline, Eta is forecast to make landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, a rare occurrence in November. And if you're thinking that's an odd name for a hurricane, of course we're using Greek alphabets now because the normal alphabet has been exhausted this year. Your Lordship's House might think about the people living now in low-lying areas around the world, including in the UK, and we had reference earlier to flooding. Hearing reports from the Arctic of the failure, still at the end of last month, the sea ice to form. That month broke the record for the lowest sea ice extent in October, over 1.5 million square miles less than the 1980s average. That's an area larger than India, if you can envisage that. Now, the proposal in Amendment 169 is modest. Anyone asking for financial assistance needs to prove how their requests measure up to the climate, nature and environmental goals and targets, and the government needs to check to ensure they are not boosting future hurricanes or ice melt, or further treating our planet as a dumping ground or killing our wildlife. If you put those individual requests together, it will enable the governments across the UK to better understand the aggregate impacts of the financial assistance, the state aid as others have called it, and to measure them against the goals and targets to which they are already committed. Impact statements would not be an additional burden, but a necessity to reach shared goals. I conclude by noting that the Conservative Party manifesto last year promised, and I quote, the most ambitious environmental program of any country on earth, close quote. How could any government elected on that platform decline to include this amendment in the bill? Thank you, my lords.